Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our service here at First Church, Rosebery Street, and welcome also to those of you who are watching us online. Today's service is being led by Rev Brian Ammons, and next week's service will be led by Mr. Ray Allen. The fourth of our summer recitals will take place this coming Wednesday afternoon at 1:15 p.m. This time we'll hear from Ben Gannon on the oboe, accompanied by Donal McGriskin MBE on the piano. Do come if you can. Today's flowers are from Jim Swan to mark the occasion of his wedding anniversary on the 20th of August coming. Copies of the August newsletter and calendar are still available in the vestibule if you've missed out. And just an advance notice, there's be a special committee meeting on Thursday 24th of August at 7:30 p.m. in the Minor Hall. Do please join us for tea or coffee in the Central Hall next door after the service. Thank you.
Good morning. It's good to be in worship with you again. You all are welcome here, and all of you is welcome here. If you'll join me in our opening prayer. Loving Spirit, in the midst of life's busyness, we gather in this sacred space to find stillness and silence. As the words of Psalm 85 remind us, grant us the peace that surpasses understanding. May our hearts be open to your presence as we seek wisdom, justice, and unity. Guide us in the path of compassion, and let this community be a haven of love, understanding, and celebration of what each of us brings to the table. We pray for healing in places torn by conflict and strife. May your peace touch those affected by violence, injustice, and disaster, bringing comfort and strength to those who are suffering. As we reflect on the stillness within this sanctuary, we also recognize the stillness that exists within each of us. Help us find moments of quiet amidst the chaos of life, where we can listen to your gentle voice and find renewal. Guide us to be instruments of your peace in a world so often filled with noise and confusion. And as we enter into this time together, we join our voices praying the prayer that Jesus taught us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. And I invite you to rise now in body or spirit and join your voices in song with our first hymn, number 48, Through All the Changing Scenes of Life.
Thank Good morning. Pamela had said to Fiona and others earlier in the week that she'd had a recent memorable encounter with a kingfisher bird. And it prompted me to read again my little recollection of my kingfisher encounter. I'd been walking early one Sunday morning a few years back along the coastal path in the harbour estate. We were just about to leave the Presbyterian church, deeply frustrated and not having a clear vision of the way forward. All seemed grey and we needed inspiration. As a footnote, our common kingfisher in Ireland is only the size of a sparrow. It's small, unlike their larger relative, the Australian kookaburra. I'm sure there are American species of kingfisher as well, but I'm not aware of the detail. Remarkably, they eat around 60% of their body weight every day. Some of us might approach that as well, but the kingfishers remarkably eat a lot of fish. Their presence is a sign of clean, clear river water. But it's a perilous time for the young fledged kingfishers, forced out of their parents' territory early on, and 50% die of hunger, drowning, or predation in the first 2 weeks. But what struck me most was how highly evolved their visual organ is, their eye. The third transparent eyelid they use in the water. It allows them to keep sight of any tiny trout or minnow that they pursue. The fovea in our eyes is the most sensitive part of the eye. It allows us to focus on the detail. We have one on either side. The kingfisher has two, the main fovea and an auxiliary one, which they use underwater, and they remarkably switch to the auxiliary fovea when they dive underwater. Anyway, this little poem is called Kingfisher Blues. Near the Zamfire he sat, starting when we came, leaving his trolley perch, which had caught the weeds on their way to our grey Belfast loch. A darting shock of meaningful blue. Him, the first I'd really seen. Eyes evolved much more than mine. He knows what he's after, what he's for. Even when he enters another medium, a third eyelid, and a second fovea. Oh, for a bird's eye view on Sunday morning.
Our second reading today comes from 1 Kings in the Hebrew Bible. If you were here last week, you heard our friend Paul Bates preach on the Transfiguration, in which Moses and Elijah appear on a mountaintop alongside Jesus, and a cloud descends and a voice speaks out of that midst. That story is sort of a sequel to this story, which is itself a sequel to a story about Moses. All three are what Paul referred to as theological stories. And my take on that is that these stories are perhaps more interested in speaking about truths than historical facts. Somewhere in the Enlightenment, we collapsed those two categories, truth and fact. But as we find ourselves squarely in postmodernity, perhaps there's some room for us to tease them apart again, and in so doing, open ourselves to deeper meaning. So hear these words from 1 Kings chapter 19. At that place he came to a cave and spent the night there. When the word of the Lord came to him, saying, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" He answered, "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." He said, "Go out and stand on the mountain before the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by." Now there was a great wind, so strong that it was splitting mountains and breaking rocks in pieces before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire. But the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a sound of sheer silence. When Elijah heard it, he wrapped his face in his mantle and went out and stood at the entrance of the cave. Then there came a voice to him that said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" And he answered, "I've been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away." The Lord said to him, "Go, return on your way to the wilderness." If you'll join me in our second hymn, hymn number 299, "Father, hear the prayer we offer." It was 2011. We were gathered, it was a gathering of faith leaders somewhere in the mid-Atlantic region of the U.S., mostly writers, speakers, and activists. At the time, I was an education professor, and that, coupled with being the only person attending who didn't come from an evangelical background, made me a bit of an outlier in the group. But they valued my perspective and wanted the voice of someone with my particular lived experience in the room. I felt respected, if not fully a part. My colleagues, many of whom became good friends, were navigating a world of heresy hunters as they were speaking up about social justice issues in a landscape that was often populated with folks who were quick to catch them out. The audiences of post-evangelicals out in that speaker circuit was ripe with bloggers policing theological orthodoxy. I was pretty removed from all of that. I wasn't post-evangelical, and to the extent that I was encountering the more vicious corners of the blogosphere, my very existence already was controversial enough to deem me a heretic. But I was here to learn and support and to speak my truth in a room full of folks who, for the most part, were willing to hear it. So a couple days into our time together, we played a game they called Gotcha, in which we were to practice our responses to questions that might come from the floor when we were doing speaking events. The kind of questions that were designed to trip us up. The kinds of things the heresy hunters love to ask and then tweet out our responses to their followers so as to discredit us. My turn came, and they asked, "Do you believe in hell?" "Yes," I responded quickly. The room looked somewhat surprised. "I call mine the year 2003. When was yours?" It was a clever quip and a redirect, the very kind of thing that we were practicing. But it was also the truth, or close to it. 2003 was pretty awful for me. And while I know that there are folks in my line of work who spend a great deal of time and energy either making the case for or against the existence of hell, all I could think of in that moment is that for those of us who have lived through it, hell sure seems pretty literal. You'll have caught on by now that I have a lot more time for what our religious traditions have to say about the world we live in than about what they have to say about what comes after. It's not that I don't care. I've just gotten pretty comfortable with that being in the category of things I can't ever really know or do anything about, so I focus my energy elsewhere. I stepped out of the gospel readings today to one of the Hebrew Bible lectionary texts because it's a story that speaks to me and always has. All three narrative options in today's text tell some story of faith and doubt, and all have the protagonist going into a dark place. If we'd stayed in Matthew, where I've been preaching from, it would be the stormy seas of Galilee and Peter nearly drowning. If I'd opted for Genesis, it would be Joseph being attacked by his brothers and thrown into a ravine. But I chose to go with Elijah in 1 Kings because of the three, he's the one who chooses to enter into the darkness willingly. He seeks refuge in the cave. He retreats. All three characters are facing life and death situations. But Elijah is hiding out from a very real death threat, and so exhausted and weighed down that he's not even sure if he wants to live anymore. In the section just before what we read today, he asks that he might die. saying, "Oh Lord, take away my life." He's traumatized, despairing, angry, and unsure. So he goes to this cave to withdraw. First off, good on you, Elijah. Sometimes the world's just too much, and taking a break to hide and regroup is the only reasonable response. For anyone that has spent any part of their lives speaking truths that folks don't want to hear, for anyone that has experienced the kind of trauma that came his way in response, hiding in your cave, even when not being sure that you can sustain the will to live, is in fact making a choice to do just that. To live. To survive. So Elijah's there in his cave, and since he's in trouble with the powers for calling his community back to their traditions, and since the story comes well after the events of Moses, we know that Elijah knows the Moses stories and traditions. The whole passage then is in conversation with that story from Exodus when Moses took to the mountains. And knowing how God had interacted with Moses, Elijah must feel particularly abandoned. I mean, Moses went out and did God's bidding, and God just kept showing up and chatting with him, supporting him every step of the way. Elijah, however, is alone in the darkness, and it's not hard to imagine him saying, "Where the hell are you, God?" He falls asleep. And I hope for his sake, it was a good, long sleep. As he wakes, he gets a nudge. Maybe he's imagining it, or maybe he's remembering how the story had unfolded for Moses, or maybe some part of him knows something the rest of him can't hold on to just then, but he hears a voice say, "Why are you here, Elijah?" And he snaps back. "I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts, for the Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking out my life to take it away." That voice speaks again and tells him God's about to pass by, so he summons up the strength, perhaps with a bit of resentment, and goes to the mouth of the cave. Now, when this same scene played out for Moses, God covered the prophet's eyes for a bit, because no mortal could handle seeing the face of the divine. But then God removed God's hand, and Moses caught a glimpse of God's backside. Not for nothing. God had already shown up for Moses in a burning bush and in a storm cloud. God was not subtle with Moses. Elijah had heard this voice before, but one could be forgiven for not being so sure of the voices one hears in one's head. Surely he wondered if he'd just gone mad. He had no burning bush, just this troublesome inner voice. So Elijah goes out, and what he experiences sure sounds like another vision of hell. Survivors of trauma often find it difficult to know when things are safe. Bodies react to stimuli disproportionately and sometimes pull them back into re-experiencing that trauma. So maybe Elijah is seeing what's there in front of him. Or maybe he's coming out of the dissociated experience of the cave into a series of flashbacks or hallucinations. But what he gets is a violent wind, but no God. Then the ground literally quakes, and still no God. Then fire rips through the landscape, yet still no God. Elijah experiences 3 natural disasters in a row. Massive expressions of power, each of them destructive. They seem to him like the kind of ways God might show up. I mean, the stories of his tradition have God manipulating the elements pretty dramatically, parting seas, bringing floods, and not to mention those storms and burning bushes that Moses got. Moses got all the breaks. All that drama, all that power, all that destruction, whether manifestations of his nervous system going into high alert or reasons for it to do so, he experiences it all unfolding in front of him. And still, where is God? Then it stops. Everything goes still. And there is sheer silence. And in the silence, he begins to trust that God is there. We know that's what Elijah is thinking, because in that moment he remembers the teaching from the Moses story that mortals like him can't handle seeing the face of God. So in another step towards choosing to live, he covers his face. Maybe he doesn't trust God to do that for him the way that God had done for Moses. That makes sense given the circumstances. Traumatized folk have trouble trusting that anyone will look out for them, and with good reason. So he takes precautions, just in case. And he stands there, blindfolded, and experiences stillness. He experiences quiet. He experiences nothing. And for a moment, he gets relief. The trauma loosens its grip on him, and in the nothingness, he encounters the divine. When the silence breaks, that same soft voice, now identified in the text clearly as God, asks again, not in a way that condemns or chides him, but like a wise and grounded friend that can see him exactly where he is. What are you doing here, Elijah? And again, Elijah repeats the same words. I have been very zealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. The Israelites have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. I alone am left, and they are seeking my life to take it away. And I'd like to imagine that the tone is different this time, that this time, trusting more in the stillness and with a more regulated nervous system, it's less a cry of fear and anger, but perhaps more a clear statement of a present and very difficult reality. Maybe it's even almost a question. Are you really in this with me, God? God wasn't in the mighty winds, the earthquakes, or the fires. God was in the still presence. Elijah, at least in that moment, believes and trusts this. And then God says, go and return on your way. And then follows it with a set of instructions as to how to navigate next steps and the danger that would surround Elijah when Elijah returned. So we could read what God said there as cruel and relentless. After all, God has just seen Elijah on the brink, pushed to the very edge. To send him back to work would just seem callous. Or We could read it as God saying something very like what a wise friend said to me back in 2003. Today is not your forever. I needed to hear that I wasn't done. I needed to know that my capacity to do good work in the world wasn't over. I needed to know that I wasn't alone. And while the ripples of that hell stayed with me, sometimes visit me still, I needed to believe that there were other options for the rest of my life than to stand blindfolded at the mouth of the cave and hope the stillness would last. But perhaps, most of all, I needed to know that the meaninglessness and the chaos I was experiencing wasn't God. The stillness. That's what's returning with Elijah on his way. He's not alone. And having learned that God is not, in fact, the author of chaos, he can face the tasks ahead. I don't know what your version of my 2003 is. I don't know what hell you've known, or for some of you, what hell you're in right now. But I do know that it's okay to hide in a cave for a while. And when the storms settle and the stillness comes, even if just for a little while, when you know that you are not alone, and that day is not your forever, my hope, my prayer, is that you'll answer that still small voice that whispers, "Go, return on your way." While our very worst days undoubtedly change us, they don't have to define us, at least not completely. Even in the fire and the wind and the earthquakes, the still small voice remains. You are not alone. God is present. If you'll join me in our closing hymn, it's hymn number 8, Dear Lord and Father of Mankind, and we're going to omit verse 4 in this. So it's hymn number 8, omitting verse 4. I invite you to stand and join your voices in song. And now the time's come for us to go from this place. And as you go knowing this. You're a beloved child of God, and nobody can take that from you no matter what. So go out and shout your hallelujahs because we need you, but don't go alone. Carry us with you and trust in the experience of stillness that will sustain you. Go in peace. Amen.